He was lying awake at 2:13 a.m., the glow of his phone a small, accusing rectangle on the nightstand. The alerts had quieted, but the numbers kept talking. Overdraft fees, minimum payments, a calendar of bills like a line of teeth waiting to bite. He told himself he'd figure it out tomorrow. He told himself he'd get lucky, find extra hours, or catch a windfall. He told himself the problem was someone else's fault, the market, the boss, the tax code. And in the morning, he did the same thing. He hustled, he cut back on a coffee here and there, he promised himself discipline. But the balance barely moved, and the anxiety simply refined itself into a quieter, persistent hum. What changed for him was not a secret side hustle or an inspirational one-liner. It was a mindset shift that reorganized how he treated problems. He stopped treating problems like enemies to be avoided and started treating them like information to be read, tested, and acted upon. That tiny change, seeing problems as data, opened a method. Not hope, not wishful thinking. A repeatable 4-stage framework that turned random panic into systematic progress. If that sentence lands on you the way it landed on him, if your nights are punctuated by the same scrolling feed of worry, stay with this. This is not a pep talk, and it's not a promise of instant riches. It's a manual for thinking differently and for building a muscle that produces measurable results over time. Subscribe or save this for later if you want to walk through the whole method end to end. This is the sort of guide people return to again and again. Let's name the framework right away because structure calms the chaotic part of the brain that wants to panic. Identify, root cause, generate solutions, implement and optimize. That's the spine you'll use to turn problems into experiments and experiments into progress. But before you run through the steps, you need to clear out a few mental traps. Those invisible habits that make problems feel like punishment rather than information. He was entangled in 4 of them. First, emotional hijack. When invoices stack up, your limbic system gets loud. You react. You cut spending indiscriminately, or you binge shop to soothe yourself. Decisions made under that surge of emotion are fast and often self-defeating. Second, assumption addiction. You accept a surface story as the full story, I'm bad with money, or I don't have time. And then you build strategy on top of that claim without testing it. Third, solution attachment. You latch onto an idea because it feels good, outsourcing budgeting to an app, for example, without checking whether it addresses the real bottleneck. Fourth, perfection paralysis. You wait until conditions are perfect before starting, which in practice means waiting forever. These are common. They are solvable. The rest of this listening session is about replacing those traps with habits, curiosity, testing, sequencing, and measurement. Start with a tiny micro-action right now. Pick one recurring pain you have, late rent, chronic overdrafts, or the feeling that you never have time for important work. Spend 5 minutes writing the symptom, as you would tell a friend. Don't analyze yet. Just observe. This 5-minute note is the beginning of turning a reactive loop into a diagnostic case. Problems as information, the reframe that rewires everything. Imagine you're a detective called to a scene. The window is open, the vase is broken, the footprints are muddy. An amateur looks at the shattered vase and blames the cat. A methodical detective sees the broken vase as a clue. It tells them when, where, and how to look next. The broken vase is not the enemy. It is a message. When he shifted to that detective stance, he stopped chastising himself for being bad at money. He began to ask, what exactly happened before the balance dip? What systemic patterns repeat? What is the smallest test he can run to see if one of his hypotheses is true? That voice, curious, not ashamed, changes the whole game. A micro-task to build that posture. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I always screw this up, interrupt it. Replace the phrase with a question. What exactly went wrong last time? Write the answer in 3 bullet points. Observable facts only. No interpretive adjectives. Facts are the raw material of good problem solving. The 4-stage framework explained, so it actually works. We'll use this backbone repeatedly. Think of it as a diagnostic cycle. each stage feeding the next. 1. Identify. Get precise about what's happening. What are the observable symptoms? Where do they occur? What's the scale, frequency, and recent trend? 2. Root cause. Don't accept the first story. Trace backward to find structural drivers. Use techniques that reveal patterns and hidden assumptions. 3. Generate solutions. Create options across scales, tiny experiments, moderate changes, and structural redesigns. Use creative constraints. 4. Implement and optimize. Pick a sequence, take minimum viable action, measure, iterate, and build the environment that sustains the change. You'll repeat this cycle. Each pass reveals better data, better hypotheses, and better solutions. Now let's dig into the first stage, because most people stop here with lazy answers. Getting real about identify, techniques that expose the real problem. Surface symptoms are seductive. They're loud. They invite quick fixes, but they rarely address the chain that created them. Your job in the identify stage is to map what's visible so that you can see what's hidden. Start with the 5-layer method. It's simple and practical. Write down the problem in one sentence. Then ask, what happened immediately before it? Then ask what happened the week before, then the month before, then the year before. Keep pushing back until you see a pattern. Here's how it looked for him. The symptom. I spend money too quickly. 1 layer back. I make impulse purchases after stressful days at work. Back another layer. I don't have a reliable routine to transition out of work, so stress carries into my evening decisions. Back again. My job puts me in high-pressure, reactive situations 6 days a week, and I don't have boundaries. Another layer. In my family, spending has been modeled as a reward for surviving stress. Each layer reformulates the problem from a personal failure into a set of behaviors, routines, and social signals, things you can name and test. Micro-action after the 5-layer method. Take 5 minutes and do this for your chosen problem. Don't judge the answers. Just push backward 1 layer at a time and write them down. If you get stuck, ask, what was different the last time this didn't happen? Problem mapping. Draw the room the problem lives in. A problem rarely exists in isolation. It lives in a system of triggers, habits, people, rules, and constraints. Problem mapping means drawing that room. It looks like a spider diagram. The symptom in the center, causes, influences, stakeholders, and timelines radiating out. For the spending example, map might include work stress, late dinners out, social apps with promotions, 2 credit cards with autopay on different days, overlapping subscription renewals in the same week, small cash buffer. On the stakeholder side, partners' expectations, friends' habits, roommates' influence. On the resource side, time availability, emotional energy, financial literacy. Micro-action for mapping. Grab a blank sheet and spend 10 minutes sketching 1 problem map. Put the symptom in the middle and add at least 8 nodes that influence it. Draw arrows for causality or correlation. You don't need to be artistic. Clarity beats neatness. Perspective shifting. Ask what an outsider would see. You are too close to your own systems. Perspective shifting is a purposeful dissociation. Imagine an external advisor, an accountant, a coach, a friend who doesn't carry your emotional background. How would they describe the problem? What habits would seem most obvious to them? What is the thing you're glossing over because it's familiar? When he framed the issue as, if I were advising a friend, what would I say? The answer was immediate. You're treating short-term relief as strategy. That observation reoriented decisions from band-aids to systemic experiments. Micro-action for perspective shifting. In your notes, write the problem as you would explain it to a mentor. Then write how you'd explain it to a stranger on a plane. Compare the 2 descriptions. Which contains more neutral facts? Timeline analysis. Build the story of the problem. Look for tempo. Problems have histories, events that accelerate them, and periods when they improve. Build a timeline. Note inflection points, job changes, relocations, family events, health issues. Those points are often where habits shift and where leverage is possible. He noticed that his spending spiked during a 2-month stretch after a promotion. The new role demanded late dinners and a social presence he hadn't previously maintained. The raise increased his available credit, and the pattern stuck. The timeline revealed an opportunity. Modify the way he engaged with the new role, rather than attempting a blanket, be disciplined approach. Micro-action for timeline analysis. Take your problem and list the top 5 events in the last 2 years that might have changed how it operates. Label them accelerators or buffers. This quick map helps you find where to test first. Impact and resource inventory. Know what you can use? Problems are not only about what's wrong, they're also about what's available. Make an inventory of your resources and where the impact really is. Resources include time, cash, skills, social capital, reputation, and energy. Impact refers to who benefits or loses when the problem persists. He realized 2 things from this inventory. His most available resource was his time on weekends, and the person most affected by his anxiety was his partner. That reframed the target of initial experiments, small weekend routines, and a transparent conversation with his partner about shared financial goals. Micro-action for inventory. Set a 10-minute timer and list every resource related to your problem. Then rank them by availability and by how quickly they can be mobilized. Constraint testing. Use limits as creative edge. Constraints force creativity. They reveal what's essential and what's noise. Instead of asking, how can I eliminate my constraints? Ask, how can I use constraints to design a better system? One constraint he chose. He cut his online shopping window to Saturday mornings only for 1 month, with a $50 weekly cap. The constraint was tight enough to change behavior, but loose enough to be sustainable. More importantly, it was testable. He could measure whether restricting shopping time reduced impulse buys or simply deferred them. Micro-action for constraint testing. Pick one constraint you can enforce for 2 weeks, time, money, or platform, and commit to it. Note your baseline behaviors for 1 week, then activate the constraint and observe differences. Mini hook. Here's the mistake 90% of people make. See if you do it too. After you map an inventory, most people jump straight to solutions that feel good. They pick a fancy app, a course, or a productivity tactic that promises transformation. That's solution attachment. The better move is to test assumptions. If you tested one constraint above, did it change the pattern? If not, your assumption was wrong. Good. You've learned something that refines your next hypothesis. He tested limiting shopping windows and found his impulse purchases didn't vanish. They just migrated to late-night takeout and vending machine snacks. The constraint revealed a different driver, emotional hunger after work, not an attraction to shopping per se. That shifted the focus from spending reduction apps to post-work transition routines. A simple diagnostic test you can run in an evening. Pick one habit you think causes the problem and remove it for 48 hours. If the symptom reduces, you found a lever. If it doesn't, you've ruled out a false solution. Transition toward root causes. Stop at story, start at structure. So far, you've moved from symptom to mapping, inventory, timeline, and constraint tests. You've begun to see that problems are embedded in routines, social cues, and environmental structures. The next stage is root cause, where structure lives. Don't confuse cause with moral failure. Root cause often takes the shape of a rule or a repeated interaction, an autopilot setting in your environment. For the spending problem, one root cause wasn't lack of willpower. It was a missing transition ritual between work and home that left emotional needs unaddressed. Another root cause was the payment cadence of various debts that created resource crunches mid-month. These are things you can change. Before we step into systematic root cause tools, here's a micro-action to prepare. Choose one pattern from your map that repeats every month. Write down its cadence, what triggers it, where it reaches peak pain, and what indirect consequences it produces. This is your candidate for root cause analysis. Introducing the 5 whys. Used wisely. One of the most useful tools for root cause is the 5 whys. It's simple. Ask why 5 times until you get beneath the surface. But it's also easy to apply poorly. The key is to base each why on a verifiable fact from your mapping and timeline, not on an interpretation or a moral label. He tried the 5 whys on a late-month cash shortfall. Why number 1? Because I run out of usable cash. Why number 2? Because several bills are due simultaneously. Why number 3? Because auto payments for subscriptions are grouped at the start of the month while payday is mid-month. Why number 4? Because he never aligned billing cycles with pay cycles when he set up accounts. Why number 5? Because financial setup was never a planned activity, it was reactive. That 5th why revealed a structural gap. The financial rhythm of his accounts wasn't aligned with income rhythm. Fixing that required coordination, not willpower. That's a teachable, testable change. Micro-action for your own 5 whys. Pick the pattern you mapped and ask why at least 5 times, grounding each response in the timeline or observable behavior. Don't stop at a characterization like, "I'm careless." Keep pressing for mechanical causes. Pattern recognition and systems thinking. Look for loops. Root causes often show up as feedback loops. One behavior feeds another, and the system self-reinforces. Systems thinking asks, what loops are present? What amplifies the problem and what dampens it? In his case, negative feedback looked like this: stress, late-night spending, immediate relief, temporary increase in debt, increased stress. That loop is amplifying. Meanwhile, a dampener would be a routine that interrupts the cycle, an evening ritual that reduces stress and prevents impulsive purchases. Micro-action for pattern work. Draw a simple loop. On one side, put the action that triggers the cycle. On the other, put the consequence that feeds back. Identify one small intervention that could break the loop and test it for 2 weeks. Environmental and emotional analysis. Where the problem resides physically and mentally. Root causes live in environment and emotion. Sometimes a small environmental tweak, moving the credit card out of a wallet, unsubscribing from promotional emails, reduces friction for the desired behavior. Sometimes emotional undercurrents, like using spending to cope with loneliness, require experiments that address the emotion directly. A brisk walk after work, a call to a friend, a 5-minute breathing practice. He found that unsubscribing from promotional emails decreased his online temptation by a measurable amount. He also created a 15-minute decompress ritual as he walked from the office to his car, a short playlist, a 1-minute breathing exercise, and a planned stop at a grocery store if he needed food. Those 2 changes together produced a modest but consistent reduction in impulsive expenditures. Micro-action for environment. Pick one environmental cue that triggers the problem and remove or alter it for a week. For emotion, try a short regulation technique, deep breathing, a 90-second grounding routine, or a 5-minute walk immediately after the trigger. Stakeholder and resource gap analysis. Look at interactions. Problems are social. Who else is part of this system? A partner, a boss, a friend, a service provider. Stakeholder analysis lists the people and institutions that interact with the problem and clarifies their roles, incentives, and constraints. When he mapped stakeholders, he discovered an invisible driver. His friends expected certain social activities, and declining invitations required explanations he wasn't prepared to give. That social expectation created a consumption pressure that pulled him off plan. The solution wasn't to stop socializing. It was to change how he socialized and to have honest scripts ready for friends. Micro-action for stakeholder work. List every person or institution that interacts with your problem. For each, write what they want, what they expect from you, and what you can reasonably ask from them. A pause for a story. How a small reframe starts a different spiral. There's a moment he remembers clearly. He had $200 left until payday, and 3 invitations that week. 2 dinners, 1 weekend ski trip. The old script would escalate into angry self-denial or secret splurges. The new script asked, "What does this scarcity tell me?" He treated the $200 as an information packet. It told him his cash flow timing was brittle. It told him social expectations were unaligned with reality. So he did two things simultaneously. He asked to split dinner costs with one friend and to push the ski trip to a later date. He also moved a recurring subscription to a different billing date. Those actions combined to create breathing room and to test a hypothesis. If billing cycles and social plans are better aligned with income, his cash flow stress reduces. The payoff wasn't dramatic overnight, but within 2 months, the pressure points he'd tracked on his timeline spread out, and he slept better. The change came from using problems as data and from taking small, reversible experiments. A micro-action to mirror that story. Pick one social expectation that costs you money. Plan a script to renegotiate that expectation for 1 month. Keep it simple. Hey, can we split this? I'm watching expenses this month. We're at the cusp, moving from structure into solution generation. You've gathered evidence. You've mapped the contours of the problem. You've tested a constraint and discovered whether a surface assumption holds. You've begun to see root causes in rhythms, billing cycles, environmental cues, and social expectations. The next stage is creative, generating alternatives. That's where you build a portfolio of experiments, small, medium, bold, that you can evaluate and sequence. But before you launch them, you must resist two temptations: picking the most attractive idea without testing it, and overloading yourself with too many experiments at once. Here's where we pause for a moment. You've done the foundational work that separates hopeful action from intelligent, iterative experiments. The next set of tools will focus on producing multiple solutions, assessing them against criteria, and sequencing implementation so you get traction without burning out. When we come back to that, you'll try a rapid ideation exercise that produces at least 9 distinct options, 1 tiny, 1 moderate, and 1 structural, for the exact problem you've been mapping. For now, prepare this one micro-action as a bridge. Take the most promising root cause insight you uncovered and sketch 3 possible interventions. 1 you could do tomorrow, 1 you could implement this month, and 1 that's a long-term redesign. Don't evaluate yet, just list them. That list will be the starting point for the solution generation session that follows. Take the 3 interventions you sketched at the end of the last section, the 1 you could do tomorrow, the 1 for this month, and the long-term redesign, and let's turn them into a field of options. The next stage is ideation. Not one bright idea, but a portfolio of experiments you can sequence and learn from. The way elite problem solvers think here is counterintuitive. Produce many low-cost probes, prioritize for learning and reversibility, and combine small wins with structural shifts. Start by widening the aperture. If your root cause points to evenings of stress that lead to impulse spending, imagine 9 interventions across 3 scales. Small, immediate actions might include replacing the first 10 minutes after work with a 90-second breathing practice followed by making a tea, moving your credit cards to a hard-to-reach place, or unsubscribing from 2 promotional mailing lists. Medium-scale moves could be negotiating a 1-month pause on a subscription, splitting social costs with friends, or scheduling 3 weekend hours to plan meals and groceries. Structural, longer-term changes might be coordinating billing cycles with payroll, redesigning your social calendar to cluster paid activities into a single month, or shifting into a role with different tempo. Those 9 options are illustrative, but here is the thinking pattern. Generate across time horizons and across impact-cost ratios. The smallest experiments should be reversible and cheap, designed to reveal whether your hypothesis about the root cause is right. The largest options are investments to redesign the system once you have clearer data. Don't let the sexy, large-scale idea crowd out the iterative probes. They will both be used, but sequencing matters. To generate rich alternatives, use constraints brainstorming. Set an artificial limit, no more than $20 per experiment, or no changes that take more than 30 minutes to initiate, and force your imagination to find workarounds. Constraints highlight unconventional levers. For him, imposing a 20 per week retail cap produced creative substitutions, borrowing tools from a neighbor, negotiating dinner rotations, or hosting a potluck instead of eating out. Those small changes accumulated into a healthier rhythm. Another method is perspective multiplication. Ask 5 different personas to tackle the problem: a frugal engineer, an empathetic friend, a ruthless CEO, a creative artist, and a retiree. Each persona will produce different options. The frugal engineer might automate bill alignment. The empathetic friend might suggest accountability conversations. The CEO might recommend renegotiating vendor terms or asking for a payroll advance. The artist could invent low-cost rituals for decompression. The retiree might suggest delaying gratification for long-term peace of mind. When he applied perspective multiplication, he discovered a middle option he hadn't considered, proposing a monthly expense-sharing plan with his roommate that honored both social life and budget constraints. Scaling and reverse engineering are powerful too. If you admire someone with steady savings and low stress, deconstruct their system backward. What are the building blocks? Schedule, payment cycles, social expectations, emergency buffer size, automation, and habits. Reverse engineer those components and test whether each piece can be adapted to your context. He reverse engineered a colleague who traveled frequently without financial churn. They automated bills, consolidated cards, had a tight weekend planning ritual, and socialized by inviting colleagues over instead of going out. Borrowing these components in his own life reduced friction. Component mixing is worth naming explicitly. Combine elements from different successful systems. Take a ritual from one model and a financial hack from another. He mixed a workplace decompression ritual from a friend with billing calendar alignment from an accountant and a spending cap experiment from a budgeting app. The mixed configuration created synergies, less stress, fewer impulses, and clearer cash flow timing. Future-back thinking helps when the problem connects to identity and long-term goals. Imagine yourself 1 year from now with the financial health you want. What steps must be true to reach that version of you? Work backward to today. He used future-back to imagine being able to accept a job that paid slightly less, but offered more control. Working backward showed he needed a 3-month buffer and a side client pipeline. That clarified which interventions to prioritize now, building a tiny freelance stream and shifting billing dates. For every creative option you produce, sketch 3 variants: a tiny probe, a medium pilot, and a structural redesign. For example, if the idea is reduce weekend eating out, the tiny probe could be choosing 1 night a week to cook. The pilot could be planning and prepping meals for 2 weekends. The redesign could be a monthly social schedule where friends rotate hosting dinners. That latter gives you experiments to test rapidly, moderate steps to scale, and a long-term structural move if the pilot proves effective. Micro-action for solution generation. Set a 20-minute timer and produce at least 9 potential solutions for your chosen problem. For each solution, write 1-sentence descriptions for the small probe, the pilot, and the structural redesign. Don't evaluate yet. Generate. Now that you have a portfolio of options, you need a practical way to decide which to try first. The evaluation stage is about trade-offs, not truth. Use a simple decision framework with a handful of criteria. Feasibility, how easy and cheap is it to try? Expected impact, what magnitude of improvement might it produce? Time horizon, how quickly will you know if it works? Reversibility, can you undo it if it backfires? Learning potential, will it reveal useful information? And alignment, does it fit your values and longer-term goals? You can add risk and scalability as additional columns, but keep your scoring lightweight. For him, 2 competing options emerged: a quick side gig to bring immediate cash flow, and a structural fix of aligning billing cycles that required time and coordination but promised ongoing relief. Using the scoring approach, the side gig scored high on immediate feasibility and short time horizon, but low on scalability without significant time investment. The billing alignment scored moderate on feasibility, high on learning potential, high on reversibility, and very high on long-term impact. That combination suggested a sequence. Start the billing alignment while launching a micro version of the side gig, 10 hours a month of freelance work. The two moves together provided breathing space and a path to sustain ongoing change. To make this concrete, apply a 3-point scale to each criterion: 1 for low, 2 for moderate, 3 for high. Score each candidate's solution across 5 criteria. Total the scores and use them to prioritize. The absolute numbers aren't sacred. Their value is to make trade-offs explicit and to reveal where you might pair options. If 2 options score similarly, choose the one with higher learning potential and reversibility. Micro-action for evaluation. Pick the top 5 ideas from your 20-minute session and score them across feasibility, impact, time horizon, reversibility, and learning potential. Sum the scores and pick the one to test this week. Implementation is where ideas die or live. Most people do the creative legwork and then fizzle because of poor sequencing, lack of measurement, or perfection paralysis. Implementation is sloppy, iterative, and focused on learning velocity. Start before you feel fully ready. The minimum viable action principle is your friend. What is the smallest, reproducible step that will tell you whether your idea is worth scaling? For the billing alignment, his minimum viable action was not to reconfigure every account at once. It was to contact 3 vendors and ask one of 2 things. Can we change my billing date to X, or can we split the payment into 2 parts? He logged the responses, measured the time it took, and noted the administrative friction. That tiny step revealed whether the redesign was feasible and what the real obstacles would be. Designing the environment is crucial. Implementation succeeds or fails not on willpower, but on friction. Make the desired path the easiest path. If your experiment is to pause impulse purchases, remove triggers, put cards in a drawer, install an extension that delays online purchases for 24 hours, and hide promotional emails behind a folder that requires 2 clicks to access. He matched environment design with a habit anchor, the decompression ritual that immediately followed work. The ritual created a pause between stress and spending. Tracking is non-negotiable. You must decide what to measure before you act. For financial problems, useful metrics include cash on hand at set points in the month, days of buffer, how many days you could cover expenses without income, savings rate, % of income saved or invested, income growth from side experiments, frequency of impulse purchases, and net spending in target categories. For behavior-related problems, measure the presence or absence of the target behavior, number of evenings the decompression ritual occurred, number of times cards were used on impulse, or minutes spent on mindful breathing. He tracked 2 simple metrics for his experiment: weekly discretionary spend and days of buffer. Each Sunday he recorded how much discretionary money he had spent that week and how many days his cash buffer would cover. Within 4 weeks, the trend line showed a modest but steady improvement. The visualization mattered as much as the numbers. Seeing the buffer expand 2 days gave him the psychological permission to keep experimenting. Anticipate obstacles by simulating failure modes. Ask, what could go wrong? What would cause me to stop? For the billing alignment, obstacles included vendors refusing to change dates, forgetting to update a single recurring payment, or social invitations that overran budgets. Plan responses. Prepare scripts to negotiate dates, create a checklist to verify every recurring charge, and keep a small contingency fund for social flexibility. Iteration is not failure, it's data collection. When an experiment fails to move the needle, it refines your hypothesis. Document 3 things after each test: what you expected, what actually happened, and what you'll try next. That short log becomes the core of your learning system. Accountability accelerates progress. He paired with a friend and agreed to a weekly check-in that was 5 minutes long. The check-in was not a therapy session. It was a brief accountability loop. What did you try? What metric moved? And what's next week's mini-experiment? The combination of transparency and brevity kept momentum without shame. Micro-action for implementation. Pick one experiment to run for 2 weeks. Define its minimum viable action. Pick one metric to track and schedule a weekly 5-minute check-in, either with a friend or in your journal. Commit publicly or with someone who will ask you about progress. As you implement, you'll hit a psychological wall more often than a technical one. That's where resilience work pays off. Problem-solving capacity is emotional muscle as much as cognitive technique. The mental traps we named early, emotional hijack, assumption addiction, solution attachment, and perfection paralysis, will return. The difference is that resilience practices let you see them coming and reduce their power. Start with emotion regulation. Simple techniques like focused breathing, the 90-30 rule, breathe for 90 seconds when a surge of emotion hits, then review your next action for 30 seconds, and labeling emotions out loud. I'm feeling anxious about money. Work because they create distance and reduce the intensity of the limbic response. He used a 90-second breathing practice after a stressful meeting, which reduced his urge to immediately numb by buying food or scrolling deals. Over time, this pause became automatic and decoupled the stress-to-spend link. Cognitive flexibility matters. It's the ability to hold multiple plausible explanations for an event and to switch hypotheses when evidence warrants. Practice this by asking, what else could be true? In his case, when an impulse purchase recurred, instead of concluding he was weak-willed, he asked whether an emotional trigger, a social script, or a timing misalignment might be the cause. That switch from blame to hypothesis opened new experiments. Uncertainty tolerance is cultivated through small exposure. If you fear not having complete information before acting, start with micro-experiments that intentionally accept ambiguity. The point is not to be reckless, but to gather information faster than you fear uncertainty. He set a 2-week buffer experiment without knowing the outcome. The narrow commitment window made action tolerable. Failure reframing is practice. After an experiment, instead of narrating the failure as evidence of incompetence, write 3 factual observations, 1 learning, and 1 next step. This factual structure prevents rumination. For him, failing to reduce spending during a particularly stressful month revealed that his decompression ritual needed to be portable. He adapted by creating a 5-minute hotel room routine. Identity separation is subtle but powerful. Avoid letting a problem define you. You are not someone who can't save. You are someone learning to design financial systems. This linguistic shift reduces threat and increases motivation. He began to use language like, "This is a problem I'm experimenting on," and that removed the freeze of shame and replaced it with curiosity. Recovery matters. Resilience is not endurance without rest. Build micro-recoveries into your week. Short walks, a 15-minute hobby session, a call with a friend. For financial work, permission to recover prevents the rebound cycle where deprivation leads to a splurge. He set a Friday ritual that included an affordable treat and a review of metrics. The ritual reduced the weekend splurge risk. Micro-action for resilience. Pick 1 regulation practice, 90-second breathing, walking, or labeling emotion, and commit to using it the next time you feel the urge to rebound with spending or avoidance. Journal what changed. Once you have reliable experimentation and basic resilience, step into advanced and systemic techniques. These are necessary when problems are multi-layered, involve multiple stakeholders, or when you want compounding effects rather than incremental change. Systems intervention asks you to change leverage points. Identify where small shifts produce outsized effects. For his finances, a leverage point was payment cadence. Moving 1 or 2 large subscriptions to align with paydays shifted tension for the whole month. For a career problem, leverage might be the frequency of face-to-face networking meetings or the format of client proposals. Paradoxical thinking helps when behavior resists direct confrontation. Instead of telling yourself to spend less, try the paradoxical move of plan to spend deliberately. By pre-authorizing small treats, you reduce the feeling of deprivation that often causes splurges. He experimented with a 1 small weekend treat rule and found it reduced secret splurges. Predictable permission reduces impulsivity. Multi-level and temporal strategies coordinate interventions across time horizons and stakeholder layers. For example, combine a short-term income boost, side gig, with medium-term system fixes, billing alignment, and long-term identity work, changing social scripts and career path. Coordinate who needs to be involved, partner, roommate, boss, vendors. He used a 3-horizon plan, stabilize cash flow in 90 days, redesign the rhythm in 6 to 12 months, and shift social norms over a year. Each horizon had its experiments and success metrics. Stakeholder orchestration is a skill. When other people's expectations shape your problem, you must design conversations and incentives. Craft scripts that are short, factual, and framed around mutual benefit. He created a 1-minute script for friends. I'm tightening up my monthly spend for the next 3 months. Could we rotate hosting or split costs when we go out? That simple ask preserved relationships while changing dynamics. Scenario planning broadens perspective. Imagine 3 plausible futures: conservative, likely, and optimistic, and test how your chosen interventions perform in each. For him, the conservative scenario included reduced income for 3 months. The likely scenario included steady income with occasional surprises. The optimistic scenario had income growth. He ensured that his priority portfolio included reversibility and liquidity for the conservative case, learning options for the likely case, and scale choices for the optimistic case. When problems cluster, multiple, linked issues, the right move is not to attack all at once, but to sequence for cascading benefits. For instance, if you're struggling with time, money, and health, a time lever intervention that frees 2 hours per week might positively affect exercise and meal prep, which in turn reduces stress-driven spending. He prioritized the time problem first because it unlocked multiple downstream improvements. Buffer creation is underrated. Buffers are small cushions, time, money, or capacity, that reduce the cost of experimentation. A $300 buffer can change decision logic and decrease stress. He prioritized creating a small buffer by short-term freelancing income and temporary expense reshuffling. The buffer didn't solve the system, but it allowed better decisions. Adaptive strategy keeps plans flexible. As you collect data, update priorities. If a medium pilot shows strong promise, accelerate it. If an experiment fails consistently across contexts, retire it and document why. The adaptive strategy is governed by decision rules you set beforehand: when to scale, when to kill, and when to pivot. Micro-action for advanced work. Identify one leverage point in your problem map that, if shifted, would create cascading benefits. Design a 2-step intervention to test that leverage point over the next month. Now let's return to the spine of the story, his financial life. You've watched the technical parts, the 5 layers, the maps, the 5 whys, turn into a suite of options. Let's fast forward through the sequence he followed, so you can feel the tempo of action and the texture of small wins. He chose 3 initial experiments: align 2 major subscriptions to payday, institute a decompression ritual after work, and launch a micro-client offering on weekends to earn an extra $250 a month. He scored the options, set minimal viable actions, and scheduled measurements. He also prepared obstacle scripts and a weekly 5-minute check-in with a friend. The first 2 weeks showed small moves. A billing date shifted, 1 subscription deferred, and a decompression ritual that stuck 4 evenings out of 7. The side gig produced $120 in the first month, half the target. But it wasn't the money alone that mattered. The money plus the breathing space created by the billing changes reduced the intensity of the mid-month panic. The metrics, days of buffer and discretionary spend, moved steadily. The second month he doubled down on the decompression ritual by combining it with 2 environmental changes. He removed payment cards from the wallet and moved online banking credentials behind an extra verification step. The friction was not painful, it was sufficient. He tracked impulse purchases and noted a steady decline. Social conversations shifted as he used prepared scripts to renegotiate a friend's expectation about costly activities. The friend, surprised but supportive, suggested alternative low-cost plans that eventually became a new pattern in the friend group. By month 3, the buffer had expanded from 2 days to 6 days. His sleep improved. He felt less reactive at work, The side gig, refined and pitched differently, brought in a steady monthly $340. That number was not life-changing alone, but combined with the structural fixes, it turned a brittle monthly cash flow into a manageable rhythm. Crucially, each step had been reversible and measured. Nothing required absolutes. He had not sworn off social life, he had redesigned it. He had not sworn off spending pleasure, he had scheduled it. That built a sustainable pattern rather than a brittle austerity. Microaction to mirror his sequence. Pick one small environmental friction you can add this week, one billing or administrative calendar change you can request, and one micro-income step you can take. Define metrics for each and schedule a 2-week test window. As you accumulate wins, consolidate systems. Consolidation is not about stopping experiments. It's about codifying what works so that less cognitive energy is required to maintain gains. Create standard operating procedures for recurring tasks. A monthly billing check, a weekend planning hour, a one-page dashboard that displays your core metrics, and a short script bank for stakeholder conversations. He created a 2-page finance SOP that included billing dates, subscription owners, and a contingency plan. The SOP reduced the administrative friction of keeping the system working. Teaching others is a master lever. When you translate your learnings into a simple script for someone else, partner, roommate, or colleague, you clarify your own mental model and build social reinforcement. He explained his billing alignment plan to his partner in 5 minutes, framed as a mutual benefit, and then asked for one specific concession: split certain costs for a quarter. The partner agreed and then reminded him gently when they both slipped. Social systems create accountability. Scaling your problem-solving capacity is the long-term payoff. As you apply the framework, you not only fix a single problem, you train a muscle. That muscle compounds. In his case, capacity building led to a new career choice 3 years later, not because the method guaranteed that outcome, but because his increased problem-solving ability let him identify opportunities earlier, negotiate better, and manage risk with more confidence. He applied the same diagnostic cycle to his job search, mapped patterns of interviews, traced root causes of rejections, generated alternative pitches, tested minimum viable proposals, measured results, and iterated. The process reduced uncertainty and increased his options. A final advanced angle: create a learning system. Block a monthly hour for reflection. In that hour, update your map, score new experiments, and journal 3 learnings. That practice prevents stagnation and makes future interventions faster. He scheduled the hour on the first Sunday of each month and treated it as non-negotiable. Over time, the hour produced a compounding set of improvements that far outpaced any single large effort. Microaction for sustainability. Schedule a recurring 60-minute reflection hour in the next 4 weeks. Use it to update your problem map and to plan 3 experiments for the month ahead. Now, reflect on identity and legacy. The mindset shift at the heart of this story is not a temporary fix, it's an orientation. Problems are no longer moral indictments but data. You become someone who designs experiments. That identity does not demand perfection, it demands curiosity. It reframes failure as feedback and makes time your ally. If you teach this orientation to someone close to you, its effects multiply. When he shared the method with 3 friends, 2 struggling with time and 1 with career uncertainty, the friends borrowed his micro-experiments and adapted them. A friend who taught part-time began to automate student billing cycles and freed 1 evening a week to produce new material. Another friend, a manager, used the 5-layer method to identify meeting overload as the real productivity drain and restructured team communications. Small capacity building in one person radiated outward. Finally, a cautionary note that keeps the method honest. This is not a promise of instant wealth or painless transformation. You will meet failures, slowdowns, and moments of doubt. The guarantee here is procedural. If you adopt the mindset and the framework, you will increase your probability of making better decisions and discovering leverage points that were invisible before. The payoff is probabilistic and cumulative. Measure, iterate, and be patient. A practical closing sequence. How to start right now. Choose one problem you currently feel most anxious about. It should be specific and recurring. Set a 60-minute session this week and do the following in sequence. First, write the symptom in one sentence. Second, do the 5-layer method, pushing back through 1 week, 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year. Third, draw a simple problem map with the symptom in the center and at least 8 influencing nodes. Fourth, identify 1 leverage point from the map. Fifth, generate 9 options in 20 minutes, ensuring each option has a small probe, a pilot, and a structural redesign. Sixth, evaluate the top 5 options using the simple 5 criteria scoring system. Seventh, choose one experiment to run for 2 weeks. Define its minimum viable action, pick the 1 metric you will track, and schedule a 5-minute weekly accountability check-in. Eighth, plan for 1 emotional regulation technique to use when stress surges. Ninth, after 2 weeks, document the result and decide to scale, pivot, or retire the experiment. Micro-action now. Close your eyes for 2 minutes and name the single recurring problem that causes the most friction in your life. Open your Notes app and write it as a 1-line symptom. That 1 sentence is the starting point. We began this listening session with the title that frames everything, the mindset shift that changed his financial life. The shift was small in words and enormous in consequence. It was a change from treating problems as moral failures to treating them as data. That reframe unlocked a cycle: identify, find root cause, generate options, implement and optimize, that turned random anxiety into a portfolio of experiments, measurable outcomes, and new habits. His financial life did not transform overnight. A better phrase is that his decision environment changed. He created friction for old, harmful behaviors and ease for the new, supportive ones. He accepted reversible experiments and built measurement into each step. He leaned into curiosity rather than shame. Over months, compounding effects appeared: cash flow stability, improved sleep, stronger relationships, and real choices about work. Problem-solving capacity translated into financial capacity because he learned to see the structural drivers of outcomes rather than hoping for external fixes. If anything in this session lands with you, let it be that you do not need to be perfect to begin. You need a method and the humility to test. Start with a 5-layer analysis on 1 problem this week. Journal the result. Run 1 2-week experiment. Schedule your monthly reflection hour. Teach 1 person your single most useful insight and ask them to try it. There is one last micro CTA. Pick up your notes now and schedule the 60-minute session for this week. That hour is the pivot point between reactivity and design. It's not a promise of certainty. It is an invitation to begin building the capacity that will change outcomes over time. He lay awake at 2:13 a.m. for many nights before he discovered the detective stance. What changed was not magic, but method. Problems stopped being enemies and became the best information he ever had. The method didn't remove risk or uncertainty, but it made risk navigable. It turned anxiety into experiments and experiments into habits. Start with 1 problem. Run the 5-layer method. Do the 20-minute ideation. Score and choose 1 2-week experiment. Track 1 metric. Check in for 5 minutes each week. Reflect monthly. Teach someone else. Over time, your capacity to solve problems will become the most dependable asset in your financial life. If you're ready, do the 5-layer analysis now. If you'd like to return to this guide, keep it bookmarked. These steps are designed to be used again and again. The mindset shift is a practice, not a one-time insight. It's the engine that converts problems into forward motion. Make your next problem the place you train that engine. Apply the first micro-action. Pick a recurring problem, write the 1-sentence symptom, and schedule a 60-minute block this week to run the sequence. Journal your result, and if it helps, share what you learned with 1 person. That is the smallest, repeatable step that begins the compounding work. He did that. It changed his nights, and then his weeks, and quietly, over time, his life. The method will not make everything effortless, but it will change the questions you ask, the options you see, and the trajectory of your choices. That is how financial lives change, not through luck, but through repeated, deliberate problem-solving.